The script was so beautiful. Getting a character on the page that is already so great is it's such a gift.
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Are you having tea today?
I am. I was just saying it's absolute sacrilege. It's in a paper cup, but it is tea. See, look at I've got a tea bag.
What kind of tea do you usually drink?
I'm kind of a herbal tea gal, I gotta
Mm.
say. I used to drink plenty of builder's tea, but I sort of just, yeah, I don't know, coffee took over. It just didn't have that caffeine kick that I needed. So now it's when I have tea, it's usually like a mint tea or chamomile. This one's chamomile and honey, and it's very lovely and soothing.
I have chamomile too, actually.
Ah, very good. Cheers.
I went to the Landmark just the day before yesterday to rewatch Belfast, and it just reminded me because I had actually visited a few years ago, so it just reminded me of this trip that I'd taken with my aunt. We had taken one of those black cabs to go
Uh-huh.
do. We were basically traveling like all through Ireland, and we were doing those black cab tours and stuff. And every single one, they would just be like, "Oh, we were in so much solidarity with the Indian freedom movement that we started naming streets and stuff after random colonies." So I'm from Bombay, and one of them was like, "Oh, we have a Bombay street. You should come
Ah, no
see."
way.
It was really interesting. There was definitely a lot that I related to growing up as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's the beautiful thing about Belfast is that it does have this, it has these themes that many people can relate to, as a small place that has civil unrest and conflict, unfortunately that exists so many places across the world. And, ordinary people trying to survive within that context is a very commonplace thing, unfortunately. But
Mhm.
it's kind of beautiful how something that was so specifically Ken's story has really resonated with people all across the world.
How did you prepare for the role?
The script was so beautiful. Getting a character on the page that is already so great is it's such a gift. But when I read it, it sort of instantly transported me back home. It made me think of my mum a lot.
Mhm.
Our circumstances were very different, but when I was a baby, we moved to the border because my dad was stationed there. He was a police sergeant. Um, and so I grew up with the troubles or that conflict sort of in the background of my childhood the whole time. And, even though this is sort of the beginning of it, a lot of those things that sort of Buddy would have been seeing, we saw those things on TV all the time. Like, there was constantly bomb scares, there was constantly bombs close by, or whether in Belfast or in Enniskillen or different places that were really only, 20 minutes away, 30 minutes away. Um, so a lot of that, the knowing what it felt like to have those things in your periphery or on the outskirts of your life, I understood. Um, and I don't know, she just felt really familiar to me. So I went back and I watched a lot of YouTube interviews of women from Belfast, from Northern Ireland, and I watched a lot of footage from those very days, and I just kind of tried to absorb as much as I could of those women's stories. And one thing that was so apparent and so strong was how, it wasn't wanted. These women didn't want this. They didn't,
Mm.
they, a lot of them, I was watching interviews of people, 10 years into the conflict, 15 years into the conflict, and they were all talking about how they never wanted it. And they had to live within that, and they had to live within that environment. And they had such strength, but at the same time, they were so hampered that there wasn't, even back then, there wasn't this ability to sort of get up and leave easily. That wasn't an easy decision for anybody to have to make. So I understood that from Ma, how difficult that was for her to try and have to do that.
I think there's like a scene where she's on the bus with Dan, like they're talking, and she's talking about how afraid she is to, immigrate really, because she's like, what if they just don't like us, because they
Mhm.
see what we're doing here, and what if they don't like us? And I feel like a lot of immigrants specifically can resonate with that, especially ones who do come from countries where conflict is common, because we're so worried about perception because it's so tied to our safety. That moment really, stood out to me. And I think one of the really interesting things was just how it was explored through the view of like a child, because children don't understand conflict that way, and so I was kind of curious to know what it was like working with Jude Hill, because that must have been, because all of you probably had lived through it or had some proximity to that experience, but he probably didn't.
It's amazing that you work with someone like Jude, and his entire life has been post-conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so he didn't, he doesn't have a recollection, or he doesn't have a concept of his home of Northern Ireland being a place where tanks would go roll down the street. And that's a really amazing thing. You think, thank God that is it. Obviously it's not a perfect peace that we've had since 98, but it's been a relative peace. And so you think, like, how amazing it is that there's these generations who've grown up and don't remember or have no concept of what that is. That was one of the beautiful things, actually, when we all met and we were talking about stuff. And I remember Ken asking him, like, what do you think of when that was happening, especially when we shot that scene where a literal tanker was going down the street. And you could see how Jude was just so, he was amazed. He was amazed that existed. But the beautiful thing about working with him is he just has all of his emotions, or this really available resource of an honest tap into his emotions. I think that was the thing that was most apparent. Even though he was very green in the beginning, he's such a quick learner. He was so, just so adapting at being able to like pick up on everything that he was supposed to do. I think day one, Ken was like, don't look down the camera. But after that, it was like, he was an old pro, and he's just the sweetest kid. But he was an incredible listener. He was incredibly just open, and I don't know, we absolutely took him under our wing and fell in love with him straight away, because he's just such an amazing little kid.
I actually these were thoughts I had while I was watching it, was do you think Buddy and Catherine wind up together? That was one of the things I really wanted to ask you.
I think Buddy went to England and Buddy found himself a new Catherine who he didn't have to work so hard for. No, I don't know.
Do you think Ma ends up liking London?
I spoke with Ken a lot about that. And, I saw sort of in my own life, my mom, when we moved, had to leave her very close-knit family. And of course, she made friends and she found a community eventually, but it's a really hard thing. I think especially, in that time, being a woman in your sort of 30s with kids, it's hard to start new friendships. And I think, Ken has spoken about how his parents, who were so social and so vibrant, how they really struggled to sort of find that new community again, which is kind of heartbreaking. They really sacrificed a lot to give him and his brother and then his little sister that sort of safe and fresh start. So yeah, I do. I think about that and Mand and what her next step was, and it can't have been easy.
A lot of people associate 2022 with change, for better or for worse, so what's something you think you'd like to change this year?
What I would like to see is, I think over the last 2 years, there's obviously been huge changes in the world, and some of those have been positive. And I think, we all realized that maybe this rat race that we were on so much, that it's not maybe the healthiest way of living, and that there's a way, hopefully, that we can move forward and retain some of that quiet time, or retain some of that like peace that we all got a little bit of.
What advice would you leave to emerging creatives and storytellers?
Well, I think one thing, especially coming from a film like Belfast, that has really, been so impactful, is when you tell your story, when you're really specific about your story, um, that often is the thing that will resonate the most with other people. I think too often we get caught up in trying to, you know, put in everything into our projects, or trying to tick a lot of boxes, but actually, when you make something really personal, it ends up, I think, resonating more because it's really in these specifics that we all see ourselves. We really ultimately, when you boil it down, are so much more similar than we could ever imagine. So, um, yeah, tell your story, be true to yourself, and that's what people will respond to.
It's been really hard, I think, this year for a lot of people to remain creative through what's going on. I definitely feel most days I'm just like in a vlog. Um, but I think that it does help keeping
Yeah,
it
and I think a
personal.
routine also. I think one of the things that I did this whole pandemic is there's a great blog that I was following, which was kind of like a creative every day giving, like, you just spend 15 or 30 minutes just trying to do something, whether it's writing a little bit or, you know, doing one thing every morning, every day, and trying to create that pattern for yourself so that, some days you'll feel like you want to continue that on for 3 hours, and some days you might not want to be able to sit through the 15 minutes at all. But it's that important thing of giving yourself just that routine to try and,
Yeah.
and just encourage that creativity to come no matter what.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
That's my
Honestly, it
pleasure.
was the best. And thanks so much for obviously being a part of Belfast. That was so wonderful as well.
Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
lovely evening. All right. Bye.